Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, I want to dive into a proposal I have for how we can fix some of the problems facing the United States today. I think there's a confluence of multiple problems that are overlapping all at once. Some are economic, some are social, some are political, and I think a lot of these problems zero in on the plight facing Gen Zers and young people. These are people born between 1997 and 2012. Some are in their mid to late 20s and some are still in high school. But this is the next generation, right? These are the people who are coming up into society and they feel like they have nothing to live for. They can't get jobs because of AI, and this is already starting to show up in economic data. MIT did an analysis of this, not MIT, Stanford. Stanford did an analysis of this. Anthropic has come out with their own data. It's very clear that um, jobs are being replaced, especially at the entry level, with artificial intelligence. And then, of course, I've talked about it on this channel, and a lot of other people talk about as well. There's a social dating crisis right now where men have gone their own way, women are just doing their own thing, and they can't seem to find um, just an amicable terms socially. And so you're seeing a decline in the development of families. If people aren't dating, they're not going to get married, and if they don't have married, they're not going to have children. So you're seeing decline in the family structure, and that gives a lot of young people not just the opportunity to grow up, but also something to live for. Suddenly, once you have kids, once you're married, once you're responsible for someone outside of yourself, your perspective on the world changes, and you have a stake in the future that you currently don't have right now if you're 21, 22, 23 years old, living in New York City, doing the girl boss thing, right? And of course, obviously, we've seen a rise in political violence that is stemming from a lot of this, especially with young Gen Z men. They just they don't have hope for the future. They're very nihilistic, and they don't feel like they can do anything about it. So, one of the things I've been trying to think about is not just talking about these problems, not just addressing them, but coming up with solutions on how to fix them. And I don't think that, any of the solutions I come up with are necessarily the right solution, but I think it's important that we talk about potential solutions to the problems we're facing. Otherwise, we're just going to keep talking about the problem and nothing's going to change, right? Like, Washington's not going to save us. Wall Street's not going to save us. Silicon Valley definitely is not going to save us. So I think it's up to you and I to kind of start thinking of things and doing what we can at a local level, maybe at a congressional level, getting pieces of legislation passed, but starting to think creatively about how to solve the problems that we are facing now and that will only get worse in the future. So, one of the things I wanted to talk about today was this piece that I wrote back in June, and it's a proposal that would solve a bunch of different problems at once. So, I think it could help put Gen Z to work, it could solve the student loan crisis, and I think it could reskill the workforce. So, you're kind of knocking out multiple birds with one stone. And so the basis for this is economic and really has to do with AI. Like there's no question in my mind that AI is going to take more jobs than it is going to create, at least in the short term. And the people who are going to be most affected are going to be Gen Z entry level workers. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's the cost reason, right? It's just cheaper, frankly, to bring an AI on. Like you don't have to pay health insurance. They're not gonna have time blindness. You're not gonna have to worry about them not showing up to work. They're not gonna be little activists in the board in their offices. They're not gonna advocate for things that go against your company's policy. Um, they're not gonna call in sick. They're not gonna take vacations. Like an AI is gonna do it as it's told. And so there's a lot of reasons to adopt them in your company. But for entry level workers in particular, it's problematic because the entry level workers lack institutional knowledge that older workers have. So if you took a software developer that's fresh out of college and a software developer that has 20 years worth of experience, the software developer that has 20 years worth of experience is probably going to fare a little bit better um, in the job market just because they have institutional knowledge. So they just know things, they understand things, they've been around long enough where they have information that can help an organization succeed, and that information isn't something that can necessarily be taught or shared. Whereas a young person fresh out of college they only have the information that they've learned from college or through internships, right? So they basically have been effectively trained on the same information that AI is being trained. So now, not only do you have a cheaper cost basis to compare AI to, they're just far cheaper, but basically entry level workers and AI agents are on the same playing field cognitively. There's nothing that Gen Z entry level workers can bring to the table that AI can't bring in terms of knowledge and in terms of experience. In fact, as AI progresses, it's going to be able to outcompete even the best entry level workers. So I don't think we've been talking about this enough. Um, it's something everyone thinks is going to happen in the future, but I think within the next year, year and a half, things are really going to start to ramp up, and people are going to lose jobs en masse. We're already seeing this, the beginning of this. They're going to be stranded in the economy. There's not going to be anywhere for them to go, and because Washington hasn't done anything, you're going to have millions of people without jobs drawing onto the social safety net of this country for and no prospects for the future. It's like they're just going to be collecting unemployment insurance, and then what, you know? Or if they don't even get the job in the first place, you're going to have a bunch of indebted college grads who are working for $15 an hour at Chipotle, and obviously that's not sustainable. So I think we're going to need a New Deal style plan to employ people and retrain people. If you're not familiar with the New Deal, there was a bunch of government funded programs in the 30s, and that's in part what helped get the United States out of the Great Depression. Basically, the government paid for like the Civilian Conservation Corps, or like the Tennessee Valley Authority. It was all these infrastructure projects. So they were paying for guys to go build roads, guys to go build dams, public works projects. And yes, it was on the government dime, um, but these programs provided people with employment in a economic environment where they weren't going to get any employment any other way. And so I think we need something similar, because we're entering into a period where just like there's going to be a vast misalignment between what workers have in terms of skills and experience and what the new economy is going to need. And you're going to have to retrain workers somehow. But I don't think it's going to be like the last decade, decade and a half, where we told everyone to go to boot camps and learn to code, or like telling everyone to go to college and get a college degree. Like, just the financing isn't in place to make the degree of reskilling available. So something else is going to have to take its place. And so I think the thing that people have to really consider about the change that's going to happen, and this is what makes this pending economic crisis far worse, in my opinion, than the Great Depression, is at least during the Great Depression, you could kind of plug and play. So if someone lost their job, say working on a railroad, you could easily put them to work building a dam, for example. Like the skills were transferable. Now you have people who are going to be leaving finance or management consulting or other like white collar office jobs, and you can't just go like give them alternative work that's either AI based if they don't already have the knowledge to work with computers, or the alternative, which is blue collar work, things like carpentry, plumbing, becoming an electrician. Like there's skills that are needed that the current workforce doesn't have. So you're going to have to find a way to retrain people fast, but also giving them types of work that they can do and work that they can use to support themselves during the economic transition. Of course, the alternative is universal basic income. That's basically socialism, and that's not going to provide quality of life for people, because as past experiences with socialism show, the goal is to reduce everyone to the lowest common denominator. So under UBI scenario, I suspect we will all be given like a basic income, so say $1,000 a month, and that's it. And whatever we can subsist on with that, that's the quality of life we're gonna have. So you're not gonna have, absent of reskilling and retraining and some sort of other income generating work, if you only rely on UBI, you're not going to have a good quality of life. And if you want to see a contemporary corollary, look at people living in Section 8 housing, subsisting on food stamps. Section 8 housing is not good. There's rampant crime, drugs, violence. Food stamps aren't, a lot of people who are on them are morbidly obese. and people use them to, do all sorts of things. They don't even just use them for food. Um, there's a whole black market of people like reselling their food stamps, and they don't exactly buy like good nutritious food with it. So I think that that's like the direction we're going if we go down the UBI path. So we need to find an alternative to that. So this is what I think could be an alternative. So my inspiration for this essay came from a video that Peter Santinella put out. If you're not familiar with Peter Santinella, he's really fantastic. He goes around the country and the world, but he just interviews locals, lets them tell their own story, talks about a variety of things. And so he went to Western North Carolina to talk to people about the recovery from Hurricane Helene. And this is something that, I personally relate to because before I moved to Austin, I was living in Asheville, North Carolina. So I was a year removed from the hurricane, and just seeing the pictures. It was just devastating. I would go run on the French Broad like every day, and there are a couple coffee shops down the River Arch district I'd go to frequently, and just seeing the destruction and just having a personal connection to that place. It was just unreal. But one of the things that he highlights in this video, and I think a lot of other people who have experienced natural disasters can relate to, is that the first couple months after the disaster, there's a lot of media attention. People are talking about it. You get a lot of donations. People want to help. But over time, those donations begin to peter out. Things begin to fade. People aren't really talking about it. And Rome wasn't built in a night. And cities like Asheville and the surrounding area, they haven't been rebuilt in the year that has passed. Approximately since Hurricane Helene hit. And so there's still people who are without permanent housing and infrastructure that has to still be rebuilt, roads and bridges and that kind of stuff. And so I highlight this because it reveals a need. So we have a need to reskill people in the workforce. We have a need to provide people with jobs. And then we have other needs that demand workers, that demand assistance, that demand help, particularly areas hit by natural disasters, but they don't always get the support they need to rebuild in the time swiftly, and not just in the time they need to, but swiftly. They don't have the resources they need to rebuild as fast as they need to get back to life as usual. So my proposal is kind of a couple parts. So how do you solve getting young people employed? So how do you provide a new employment pipeline for them? How do you reskill the workforce in general for a future workforce that is not dependent on white collar office jobs where you're just clicky clacking all day? And then how do you support communities in need? I'm highlighting natural disaster areas here. It could apply to all sorts of different communities in need. You could look at inner cities, low economic areas, all sorts of stuff. I'm just going to highlight natural disasters, but a lot have happened in the past few years. The fires in Hawaii, and then obviously in California. The hurricanes hit every year predictably. There's tornado damage across the country, so there's always a need, even if it's not in the news. There's always a need for assistance, right? There's always a need for people to come and do work in places to help rebuild. And so I'm kind of looking at a combination of these things, and how do we how do we bring them together to solve one of the biggest problems I think we're going to face in our lifetime as work changes and AI transforms what we do and how we earn money. So the first problem I want to highlight is that young people are struggling to find work, and millions of workers are crippled under a mountain of student loan debt. So, I feel for Gen Z, I really do, but they're not special or unique. Millennials preceded them, and then obviously Gen X ahead of millennials, and we've all made the same Faustian bargain where we traded our futures, we mortgaged our futures on the promise of an economy and a promise of jobs that doesn't exist, and it was never going to exist. And I think the sooner we recognize that and acknowledge that, the better off we would be. Those high paying jobs don't exist. But in the meantime, we've all been saddled with this debt, and I think it's worse for Gen Z because they don't have any experience in the workforce compared to millennials and Gen Xers, and because they don't have experience, they don't have institutional knowledge that they can leverage to at least get a somewhat decent paying job. It might not be the best paying job, but I think comparatively speaking, millennials and Gen Xers probably have a much better time finding work right now than Gen Zers who just graduate and just have nothing going for them. And so I think because like I think Gen Z is critically important, and we have to figure out how to solve this problem for them. because they're the next generation, they are the future, they are the foundation of the economy. They're the ones who are supposed to be next in line to buy houses from boomers, single family homes, when those boomers eventually sell them and sell them for their retirement so they can, live off that money. They're the ones who are supposed to be getting married and having kids. And we've already seen a delay with millennials with this happening. With myself and my friend group, I mean, we were all in our, early 30s by the time we did this, started families and having kids and buying houses. So, the more you delay that, I think the more at risk the economy becomes later on. And so, if we're not giving Gen Z the resources they need right now in their early 20s, like, there's no way they're going to be able to buy houses or start families in their 30s. Like it's just out of the question for them. So you need to give them a strong foundation so that they can become, the future that the economy needs, the future workers, the future spenders, the future homeowners. We need Gen Z. And so we need to make it possible for them to participate in the economy. And so, like I said, the other issue in an area that need is with natural disasters. There's all sorts of different natural disasters. We currently rely on the federal government to meet the needs of those affected areas, but as you've seen throughout the past, year or two, um, that's not exactly happening. I highlight one example here, but the wildfires in Lahaina in Hawaii back in 2023, for example, over 2,200 structures were burned to the ground, and so far only 6 homes have been rebuilt. So I don't know if that's just pure incompetence. I don't know if that's lack of technical skill, like they just don't have enough building materials and carpenters on the island to rebuild it. Regardless, I mean that's a pretty terrible number, right? Like there's clearly a need for rebuilding, and it's not being done, and FEMA isn't necessarily the best option to solving that problem. They're not the ones who are really stepping in and making things better. They're frankly, I think, making things worse. So I think one of the solutions we could consider, and that might be worth considering, is incentivizing volunteer service after natural disasters by allowing volunteers to work for free in exchange for student loan repayment. So I've already said, like, the economy is kind of screwed. You have no job prospects for a growing population of people that have mountains of student loan debt and no way to repay that debt. And it's not likely. I mean, there was talk under the Biden administration of canceling student loans, but I don't think that's likely. I don't think that's going to happen. So we have to figure out how to solve this problem, how to give young people a boost, how to get them to be able to participate in the economy, but do it in a way that is productive. And I don't think giving handouts is a solution either. So I think one way you could solve this problem is by connecting young workers who don't have jobs, who are drowning in student loan debt, connect them with communities that are affected by natural disasters and they need resources to rebuild their communities. And obviously over time those resources drop. So they need people. They need people who can come in and do the work, but they can't necessarily pay them for it because a lot of these small towns, especially if you look in Western North Carolina, it's a very mountainous region. So all those communities just don't have the money. They can't just like they can't just like pay you to come in and rebuild a road. Like it's just incredibly expensive. So and this is the core problem, right? Like both groups of people in this example need money. So people in natural disaster affected areas, they need money to pay people to come in to rebuild. And then Gen Zers and young people who are struggling with student loan debt need incomes to be able to repay that student loan debt. But the problem is, like, the money doesn't exist. So we have to start thinking about alternative ways of remunerating people for services and allowing people to get economic value out of the economy when money is scarce within the working class. I don't think money is scarce in general, but for all practical purposes within our day-to-day existence right now, it is. And so one of the things I think you could do is you could create jobs, kind of like the New Deal and Public Works Administration, create jobs that employ young people while supporting the rebuilding efforts in natural disaster zones. So you could do this by allowing volunteers to apply volunteer time as a credit towards the balance of their student loan. So you could set a dollar equivalent and say for every hour you volunteer with an accredited organization, you would earn, say, like $20 to put towards your student loan balance. So it's not something you're getting paid. Like you're not getting a check per se. It's not something you're getting cash in the bank, but it would be deducted from your student loan balance. So you wouldn't have to continue repaying the amount you currently have into the future. And so I give an example here of like the United Cajun Navy, for example, would be a great example of an organization you could work with. There's all sorts of organizations, but I think it would have to be an accredited organization that already is a nonprofit and that has the administrative infrastructure in place to do this. So a lot already have reporting requirements. So it wouldn't, and they do log like time, volunteer time, and who volunteers for their own individual organizational knowledge. But I think you could do this at scale, where you could log people's time, and in much the same way you have a payroll system, you could have a volunteer system that could credit people's student loan balances based on the time they serve. And the thing with this is, like, time is money. So in this case, money isn't exactly changing hands, but the equivalent value in terms of time is. And so that time is being deducted from a debt is already owed, instead of being paid out as a wage. So this is why I think this could be useful from a government perspective, as like someone overseeing it, because the government isn't creating new money. They're not printing new money to subsidize a program like this. They're just deducting what is owed to the government, especially specifically the Department of Education. So you're not creating any new money, you're just deducting what is owed. And if you understand how debt works, interest charged on debt is the creation of new money, and it is inflationary. So it has the added benefit too of, you're not just stealing from the government if you're cutting the amount of debts a student owes on their loan. You're just reducing it, and you're reducing the principal balance, right? So it just reduces the amount of interest that is accrued over time. So yeah, it's going to affect government revenue to some extent, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, because a lot of the revenue that the government is creating off of managing student loans is, in essence, printing of new money that is circulating into the economy, and that is by nature inflationary. So the other benefit to this, and this is why I think this kind of kills multiple birds with one stone, is on the one hand, there's an economic incentive. While it's not a direct wage, it's an indirect wage. You can incentivize people to work by reducing the balance of their student loans, and exchanging volunteer time for that reduction. But at the same time, you could use a volunteer corps like this to provide on the ground training for the future workforce. So a really good example is, say like home building, right? So if you have all these workers who are in white collar jobs, those jobs aren't going to exist in the future. You need more workers in blue collar jobs, so plumbing and carpentry and be electricians, welding, all that kind of stuff, right? And so the option for a lot of white collar workers is going to be to learn a trade. Well, learning a trade takes time. Going back to trade school is expensive, and then there's going to be a period of time where you're going to have to work towards mastering your trade, right? I think this is the case for anyone who's in a trade. You can learn the skills, and you have to practice it before you really become a high value earner in your field. And so I think a volunteer corps or volunteer service like this would give people who are learning skills in a trade a structured environment to practice those skills and receive like continuing education credit hours towards whatever they're working towards. And I think there's some, for example, the Texas State Board of Plumbing, you have to have 8,000 hours of experience in a plumbing trade to be eligible to take the journeyman plumber examination. So oftentimes it's not just going to trade school, you have to work so many hours in order to qualify for like the higher level of status within that trade. And like a journeyman and higher, they're going to be the ones that pay more, whereas those that below it, they're not going to pay well. And so, and just basic math, 8,000 hours, if you work 2,000 hours a year, so it's full time, it'll take you 4 years to accomplish this. So it's a significant amount of time. And so my thought is, use this kind of infrastructure. So someone working with an accredited organization underneath a tradesman within that organization to fill some of those hours. And so again, you're getting indirectly compensated through a, loan repayment, or maybe in this case a credit towards trade school. You're getting compensated in some regard, even though it's not directly. But then also you're getting a credit um, towards your certification. And so it gives young people a way to get their foot in the door, um, do something that helps them learn a skill. They're being trained in a structured environment. They're giving back to a community that needs their help. And if they have student debt, this is one way where it could be repaid. And maybe like there's another federal debt, right? So maybe not student debt. Maybe another way is use it as credit towards an FHA loan, so a down payment on a house. You could do that. If you have a debt with the IRS, use it towards that. I'm just highlighting student loans here because I think that's the most pertinent federally managed debt that faces young people. But you could use any sort of financial incentive. You could give credits towards something, um, and and enable young people to work towards their future in a meaningful way, um, you know, rather than the system we're currently working in. And while you're doing that, you're giving them the opportunity to reskill in real time. And so, I think this is important because there's all sorts of needs that need to be met, and we need to get creative about them. So people need jobs, especially Gen Z, especially Gen Zers, because they're going to be automated out of the workforce otherwise. People in natural disaster areas or low income areas or wherever, they constantly need needs, especially they constantly have needs. There's a lot of infrastructure projects that need done, rebuilding, and those projects often require skilled tradesmen to perform those tasks. And so it creates an opportunity for people to give their time and to learn, if the environment, if it's managed correctly and the environment's right for it, to learn a skill and practice it. And the problem that faces all these people is that there isn't money, right? Like you don't have money to pay volunteers. Um, you know, Gen Zers and young people need to earn an income to pay back their debts. And people in areas affected by natural disasters, they need money to be able to pay people to come in to rebuild. So in the absence of money, I think this could be an alternative where you do a time-based credit system to give people, like I said, a deduction from a student loan or credit towards something else, like a down payment on a house, and you give them you help communities rebuild, and you volunteer, you know organizations have the staff they need, to get things done. But I think the most important reason why I think this could be a really interesting policy proposal is because it gives young people a chance to reconnect with their country. And that's the thing I think we're grappling with the most right now, is you have an entire generation of highly atomized people who, you know, for for better or for worse, a lot of them came of age during COVID. So they entered into adulthood in an unusual period of time. And that I think has stripped them of their connection to their country, their connection to their communities, their connection to their friends and their family. And they just like they've turned online. They're looking for support through online communities. They've embodied their identities. And I think this is why we're going down a destructive path politically right now, because you have people who are just engrossed in a digital climate that is not conducive to the well-being of the country. I think it's highly destructive. And so more important than, paying back student loans or rebuilding communities after natural disasters, we need to find a way to get young people to love America again. We need to find a way to bring them back to this country and realize that their neighbors aren't their enemies. Not everyone is a fascist Nazi running around. Like there's good people all over this country. And I share this because this was my experience when I traveled the country, during COVID. I lived in my car and I was driving around the country, doing a massive road trip. And I had always been told that the South was bad, right? Anyone who grew up in the North, you're told South is bad. People in the South are evil. They practice slavery, Jim Crow, all this kind of stuff. They're racist. Yada, yada. When I got to Alabama, let me tell you, the people in Alabama were so kind. They were some of the nicest people I have ever met in my life. Same with Texas. There's a reason why I moved to Texas. There's a multitude of reasons why I moved to Texas. One of the reasons is because people here, they're kind, they're nice. They let you do your own thing. They're respectful. You let people do their thing. there's just a very cordial, respectful, but people are also proud. People are proud to be Texan. There's a good sense of belonging here that you don't really get elsewhere. So the whole time I thought that the South was this awful, evil place. It turned out not to be true. Okay. People in the South are lovely and they're quite nice human beings. And I think if you come from a different part in the United States, you might have other perceptions of what certain cultures and the rest of the country are like. Appalachia is another great example. Everyone thinks Appalachia is filled with hillbillies. And to some extent, maybe there's parts of it, sure. No doubt about that. But there's parts of Appalachia like that aren't. And the culture in Appalachia is, and if you watch the I'll share the link to this article, but if you watch Peter Santinella's coverage of the recovery efforts in Western North Carolina, like you really see the Appalachian work ethic. Like people, they just want to be left alone. They want to like work hard. They want to do their jobs. They want to take care of themselves. They don't necessarily want handouts or intervention. Like they're very proud people. And I think by casting all people from Appalachia as hillbillies, it really does them a disservice, right? And I think that's been done politically in this country. You think of coal miners from West Virginia as being deplorables, as Hillary Clinton said in her 2016 speech when she was running for president. She like cast all these people as deplorables, and that's absolutely not the truth. I think some sort of like volunteer service corps that has government oversight and a degree of management, but it's not a new government program per se. It's not like financing anything. It's not creating a bunch of useless bureaucratic jobs. Just like something that allows people um, to give back to their country, to work, to learn a skill, to receive some sort of financial remuneration for their service, even if it's not a direct cash compensation, while also meeting the needs of volunteer organizations or areas affected by natural disasters. I think that could just solve multiple problems all at once. I think it's something to consider. I would personally love to know what you think about this. This obviously is just my ideas, and I just threw this out here and posted it on Substack. But I think we need to get creative. I think we have a lot of complex problems in our society. We need to get creative with how we solve those problems. And I think there's some solutions that could be, it's like a Swiss Army knife, right? Like it can solve multiple things all at once. And I think we need some sort of retraining program, something to help young people, incentivize them, connect them with their society. And then there's a whole host of needs around the country. I highlighted natural disasters here. You could, put something else in the place of that, right? So I think this could be an interesting solution. I don't know if it would ever gain traction, but I'm putting it out there in the hopes that maybe someone in Washington will see this and pick it up and think it's a worthy cause. But I would love to know what you think. I've talked about something similar in previous videos about a volunteer corps. I've gotten some pushback on that, so I would love your thoughts. Like, do you think this would be a feasible policy proposal? Do you think Gen Z would buy into it? Do you think it'd be practical? Do you think it could be possible to give credit for student loans? Would that be for those of you who are opposed to student loan forgiveness? Would volunteer service in exchange for a debt reduction, would that be sufficient for you? Would that be a way to reduce the burden of student loans without giving students just a pass, right? I think there's this desire to hold people accountable for their decisions. I have my opinions on that, especially when we're talking about 17-year-olds who, didn't know any better. But that's neither here nor there. I'd be curious to know though if you think this would be a acceptable alternative to kind of come halfway, right? So you're not just forgiving student loans, but you're not holding young people hostage to choices they made as financially illiterate teenagers either. So I think this could be an interesting middle ground. I'd love to know your thoughts. Or, if you have any other experience working in volunteer organizations, and there's some things that I might have glossed over or missed, and that could impact the efficacy of a solution like this. I'd be curious to know your thoughts. Feel free to leave them in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Have a great day.